Hello everyone, welcome back to the Adaptation Station, a segment on my channel where I will talk about a certain adaptation and compare it to its source material counterpart. And today, we are going to be looking at One Piece.
Here's how the story goes, we find out by the treasure in the grand line, there's no doubt. The pirate whose eye is on it, he'll sing, I'll be king of the pirates, I'm gonna be king.
A manga and anime made by Ichiro Oda about pirates from all over the world setting sail in search for the magnificent treasure known as the One Piece left behind by the late Gold D. Roger, or Gold Roger as it's abbreviated, prior to his capture and execution by the Marines. Now there's something different about this anime adaptation in comparison to most others. People actually seem to like this one. Holy shit, could it be? Can we actually have anime in live action done right? Well, yes, but actually no. And what I mean by that is, while the show does adapt certain elements from the anime almost one for one, it does so without giving these elements proper context, and while I do understand that there are certain things that need to be left on the cutting room floor for the sake of time, I definitely feel like they could have done a lot better if they had chosen more wisely what to pick and choose for this adaptation. But we'll get into that as I'm going to go through all of these episodes one at a time due to popular demand. Which is a good thing too, because there's going to be quite a bit to unpack from episode to episode. And since I'm talking about the adaptation one episode at a time as opposed to doing it all in one whole episode, I feel like we'll be able to get through quite a bit of One Piece content. Also, there are going to be spoilers for the One Piece anime as well as the mangas. Though I will try to keep spoilers to a minimum, I can't say that I won't say anything spoilerific in regards to One Piece, so that is your warning, and without further ado, let's get into One Piece Episode 1, Romance Dawn. Now let's kick things off with the characters, shall we? Starting with Monkey D. Luffy, an up-and-coming pirate with a happy-go-lucky attitude. His dream is to gather up a crew, find the One Piece, and become king of the pirates. He also ate the Gum Gum Devil Fruit, which allows his body to stretch like rubber, but at the cost of him being able to swim underwater. The guy they got to play Luffy does a mostly accurate portrayal of the character. However, there are some things that I take issue with when it comes to Luffy's intelligence as it's portrayed in the show. Now don't get me wrong, we all know that Luffy is the stereotypical idiot savant anime protagonist. However, sometimes the show portrays Luffy smarter than his anime counterpart and simultaneously dumber than his anime counterpart. So for example, Luffy when we first meet him in the anime burst out of a barrel on Captain Alvida's ship, loud as fuck and no fucks given. In the Netflix show, when Luffy burst out and Kobe is making a racket over it, Luffy is telling Kobe in a hushing tone to be quiet. This almost tries to make Luffy seem smart as he doesn't want to alert the other pirates on the ship that he's on board. But then we get scenes, for example, with Luffy at the Marine base, looking at all the different pirate bounties and being like, hey, where am I at? And even Luffy in the anime isn't this dumb because the dude just started yesterday and yet he thinks he's supposed to have a bounty? I get that you guys are trying to show the naivete of Luffy in the show, but at the same time, Luffy in the anime isn't completely above common sense. Roronoa Zoro, a pirate hunter capable of wielding 3 swords at the same time. He's an experienced swordsman, and while he does start out as a pirate hunter, he eventually joins up with Luffy's crew as his first mate, though things are done a little bit differently in the show. And while I understand that the actor that they got to play Zoro is an experienced actor, I don't understand why he sounds so damn bored most of the time throughout this show. Like, he just sounds super uninterested in everything. There are times where he tries to sound more like a guy who isn't ready to fall asleep, but for the most part, I can tell that the only thing that's really carrying the actor throughout this role are his swordsman skills, which he does do his own stunts, so I'll give him props for that. It also lets me know that apparently you can do the 3-sword style if you really want to, so okay, not bad. Nami, a masterclass thief with a hatred towards pirates. She also has superb navigational skills. Originally, Nami's disdain towards pirates extends to Luffy as well, but eventually she comes to see that there's more to Luffy than meets the eye. And the actress gives a pretty fair portrayal of the Nami character, and look-wise, they did not disappoint when it came to the casting of Nami. Just saying, move over Sanji. I'm ready to catch a grenade, jump in front of a train, and put my hand on the blade for this one. I'm just saying, everybody's going bonkers over One Piece, and I just want a piece of that ass. Kobe, a weak and feeble cabin boy for the Alvida pirates. His dream is to join the Marines, and after meeting Luffy, learns the value of standing up for himself. And while the actor that does play Kobe does look rather weak and feeble, I can't say that the actor himself did anything for me in this role. As far as making me believe that he was the character, I mean, every time this dude talks, it sounds like he's reading directly from the script. Alvida, captain of the Alvida pirates. She keeps her crew in line with her tremendous size and strength, and is the first character to get humbled by Luffy. The actress herself does a pretty decent job of portraying Alvida in the show, but my problem with her is this: because she's only like a fraction of the size of what she is in the anime, why are all these other pirates on her ship taking her shit? I mean, yeah, Kobe isn't gonna do anything, but it would take literally probably just 5 of these dudes to overpower her, and then they wouldn't have to take her shit no more, because remember, Alvida in the anime did not look like this. She looked like this. So the sheer size of her alone would be enough to keep people in line, but here in the show, I'm just kind of like either they are the most loyal pirate crew ever, or they're all just a bunch of pansies. Axehand Morgan, the captain of a marine base in Shellstown. Now, this is a character who is somewhat different in the anime in comparison to the show. For one thing, in the anime and manga, Axehand Morgan ruled the marine base with an iron fist, punishing his subordinates for even the slightest mistake, and instilling fear into Shellstown, caring more about his reputation than the townsfolk. Though his son is also partially at fault for this as well, but more on him in a minute. The Axehand Morgan we get in the show is a lot more tame, as it seems like he's just a guy trying to do his job, and nothing else, though he does still seem to have a very high opinion of himself, and he will still make time to bitch slap his gay ass son. Speaking of which, Helmeppo, the gay ass son of Captain Axehand Morgan. Now this flamboyant daddy's boy will occasionally go around town and flaunt the fact that he's Axehand Morgan's son as a means to get what he wants, and is partially responsible for why the townsfolk are afraid of him, the Marines, and his father. And the portrayal the actor gives is for the most part accurate to how his character acts in the anime. The only difference being is that he has long hair for some reason that does get cut down later on in the episode to be more accurate to his anime counterpart, which kind of makes me wonder why they didn't just have it that way in the first place, but I digress. But anyway, with the characters out of the way, let's go into adaptation accuracy. There are quite a few things that they do get right, even some things that are excluded from the anime itself, and are manga exclusive. So here we go. Gold Roger, the king of the pirates, being executed by the Marines, sending pirates into a frenzy to go find his treasure, the One Piece, and launching off the great pirate era. Luffy admiring and looking up to the red-haired pirates, especially Shanks. Luffy stabbing himself in the eye to prove just how tough he is. If you listen carefully in the background during some of the flashback scenes, you can actually hear Binks' brew being played instrumentally. Something that gets played primarily by the musician and ninth member of the Straw Hats, Brook. But chances are we won't see him for a good while. A hungry Luffy eating the gum-gum fruit and gaining the ability to stretch like rubber, but at the cost of him being able to swim. Higuma, a thuggish looking man, coming to get a drink at Makino's only to find out that Shanks and his crew had already drunk up most of the alcohol. And despite Shanks' best efforts to keep the peace, Higuma smashes up the bottle as well as some other dishes as a means to insult Shanks. Shanks just brushing this off, and Luffy being highly irritated that Shanks isn't doing anything about this. Present day Luffy setting sail for the Grand Line looking for a crew in a tiny rowboat and having to stuff himself into a barrel as the rowboat is getting submerged in water. Luffy's barrel being found by the Alvida pirates where Luffy would meet the ever so weak and pathetic Kobe. Luffy trying to inspire some confidence in Kobe by telling him to leave Alvida's ship. Alvida discovering Luffy and trying in a vain attempt to kill him only to find out that she got more than what she bargained for as Luffy puts his gum-gum powers on full display. Luffy and Kobe leaving Alvida's ship and heading for the marine base in Shellstown. If you look carefully at the wanted posters that Luffy and Kobe are staring at when they get to Shellstown, you'll see that all the pirates on there are actual pirates of the One Piece story. There's Alvida, Buggy the Clown, Bellamy, Foxy, and Django, who should have been in this season but was omitted entirely. Roronoa Zoro, the infamous pirate hunter, being confronted by Mr. 7 of Baroque Works as a means to join their organization, which ends in Zoro declining and making quick work of Mr. 7. Nami fooling two of Buggy the Clown's pirates into helping her only for her to steal their ship and go on about her merry way. A little girl presenting Zoro with rice balls that she made herself. Helmeppo stepping on the little girl's rice balls and just being something of a brat. Zoro threatening to kill Helmeppo for being an asshole. Zoro being strung up at the marine base after making a deal with the Marines. Luffy trying to convince Zoro to join his pirate crew. Luffy and Zoro fighting side by side at the marine base, taking down Axehand Morgan in the process. Luffy and Zoro leaving Shellstown, meanwhile Kobe stays behind to join the Marines. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So now let's go balls deep into some criticism. Because call me crazy, but there are a few things that do need to be criticized. So for one thing, while Zoro's fight with Mr. 7 is canon, you never actually see this fight in the anime. In fact, it's just more or less a secondhand comment made by Zoro right before he fights Mr. 1. And I feel like they added this into the show for two reasons. Number one, they want to set up Baroque Works. And number two, they want to show that the show isn't afraid to get violent. And that's not to say that One Piece does not get violent at all. Far from it. There are plenty of violent moments in One Piece. But as far as like cutting a character clean in half, that usually doesn't happen even with a not so important character. In fact, quite a bit of the time, it is extremely rare for a character in One Piece to die in the present day. It does happen, but it is quite the rarity, even though I would say post-time skip, Oda has gotten a lot more comfortable killing off characters in present day than he was pre-time skip present day. But the reason I bring up this fight is because I feel like this this could have been omitted entirely for the sake of other things that are going to happen later on in the One Piece show. And the show will do things like that being they will add things in for the sake of making the show more entertaining. Case in point, during the final battle at the Marine base, you have Luffy, Zoro, and Nami going up against the Marines and Axe-Hand Morgan. And firstly, Nami was omitted from this fight entirely in the anime. And while Nami would make little cameos here and there, her and Luffy didn't really get to meet until the business with Buggy the Clown. But here in the show, they have her with Zoro and Luffy beating up the Marines. And I wouldn't mind that if it wasn't for the fact that because you're adding things in, you're gonna have to cut things out later on. Another thing that they added in was the fact that Zoro and Luffy are initially struggling against Axe-Hand Morgan, whereas in the anime, they made pretty quick work of him. And I get it, you want to have some visual spectacle for your audience, but the problem here is that One Piece is bonkers, man. Straight shenanigans. So if they're struggling to defeat this guy, who's pretty low level on the tier list of One Piece antagonists, then how are they gonna fare against people like Crocodile, or Rob Lucci, or Gecko Moria? Like, guys, trust me, there's plenty of fuckery to be had in this first season, so I can only imagine what they're going to do for latter seasons. But man, speaking of fuckery, let's talk about the story a little bit in comparison to the anime. So, for example, in the anime, when we first meet Zoro, he's already strung up at the Marine base. The reason why he's strung up at the Marine base is because earlier on, Zoro was just taking a breather at a diner, and Helmeppo showed up with 2 vicious dogs, terrorizing the rest of the patrons, including the owner and her daughter, Rika, with Zoro being the only one to stand up to Helmeppo. He threatens to kill him, but Helmeppo flaunts his privilege as a Marine captain's son, and says that if anything happens to him, his father and the other Marines will come back here and kill everyone in the diner. Helmeppo then makes a deal with Zoro that if he allows himself to be strung up for 1 month, not 1 week, then he'll let Zoro go and he won't bother the people at the diner ever again. Zoro agrees to this, which is how he ends up in such a predicament. It shows a lot about Zoro's character that he's willing to get strung up for 1 month for the sake of protecting people. They tried to do something similar in the live action show, but I'm sorry, it just doesn't hold water. For starters, while Helmeppo was definitely being a jerk in the show, it's not like he's putting anybody's lives in danger like he was in the anime, and yet it's presented as though Zoro protected this little girl from Helmeppo, and I'm just like, protected her from what? Verbal abuse? Yes, it was nice that he stood up for Rika, but again, no lives were put in danger here. All Helmeppo is a little bit mean to the little girl, and he steps on her rice ball, sure, but nothing overly extreme. And speaking of the rice ball incident, yes, this does happen in the anime as well, but it happens while Zoro is strung up. Rika goes over to the Marine base to where Zoro's at to give him something to eat because he's been starving for a while. Helmeppo shows up and tries to eat the rice balls for himself, only for him to spit them out and stomp on both of them. When Luffy shows up later on, he does feed Zoro the rice balls that got stomped on because he's been starving for weeks. In the show, Helmeppo only stomps on one of the rice balls, and Zoro eats the one that he stomped on. And I'm thinking, why don't you eat the one that's perfectly good and round? Sure, it's probably past the 5-second rule, but it's better than eating one that got squished by somebody's foot. I'm just saying, it makes Zoro seem more psychotic than it does make him look like a decent guy. Another thing too is in the anime, when Luffy tries to untie the strung up Zoro, Zoro is adamantly against this because he has a deal with the Marines that if he can survive for 1 month, they'll leave the people alone. That, and Zoro is adamantly against joining Luffy's pirate crew. That is until he finds out that the Marines never planned to honor their end of the bargain and were actually going to execute Zoro before his time was up. And since that day, Zoro has been a loyal member of the Straw Hat Pirates, him being Luffy's first mate. And that's another thing between the anime and this episode. In the anime, the first few episodes kind of let you know that things aren't exactly as black and white as they seem. Not all Marines are this pinnacle of justice and protection, and not all pirates are these plundering, murdering scalawags. Another thing to keep in mind is that the Marines that are doing these horrible things like attacking innocent civilians are only doing so because they're following the orders of Axe-Hand Morgan, and also Helmeppo. So when Axe-Hand Morgan gets defeated, all the other Marines are like, fuck yeah, because they hated that asshole and his little bitch ass son. So they're actually grateful to both Luffy and Zoro. It's only when they find out that Luffy and Zoro are pirates that they're like, hey, we appreciate everything you guys did, but at the end of the day, you guys are still pirates and we're still Marines. So while we're overlooked you this one time, you guys have got to leave. And Luffy even forces a fight between himself and Kobe in order for Kobe to disassociate himself with Luffy and have an easier time getting into the Marines. In the show, Zoro is allowing himself to be tied up by the Marines because he assaulted Marines at the diner, and because of that, he can't collect his bounty on Mr. 7. So Axe-Hand Morgan makes him a deal that if he can survive 7 days out in the courtyard, he'll let him go and he can collect his bounty on Mr. 7. Zoro agrees to this and he gets tied up. Luffy comes over, unties Zoro. Zoro's like, thanks for untying me, but I'm still not joining your crew. And yet Zoro never tries to get away from the crew all throughout his time in the show, which granted he is a pivotal character of the anime, but my problem is, why didn't you just make him the same way that he was in the anime? Like, Zoro is fine as is, there is nothing to fix there. I don't know if they were going for like a tsundere type of thing with Zoro, but they need to just let the character be the character. And real quickly, let's talk about this courtyard fight scene, because there are a few things that just don't add up. For starters, how come none of the Marines tried to shoot anybody? We know that Luffy is bulletproof, sure, but they don't know that. So the fact that they don't even make an attempt to shoot is baffling, and even if they did know that Luffy can't be harmed by bullets, Zoro and Nami are very much susceptible to getting shot. But instead of using this very sensible tactic of taking out your gun, aiming and shooting, they all just decided they're going to trickle in 2, maybe if we're lucky 3 at a time, towards Zoro, Nami, and Luffy. And I get it, you know, Luffy and his gang are constantly fighting against waves of enemies that are basically just fodder. The problem is that in the anime, even the fodder enemies know that they stand a better chance against the Straw Hat Pirates if they form up. Also, the whole map to the Grand Line thing, they treat it almost like this MacGuffin, not just in this episode, but throughout the entirety of the show, as though it's this rarity to have a map to the Grand Line, though there are plenty of pirates that have a map to the Grand Line. So I really don't get it unless you're trying to tell me that the map was stolen from one guy, and stolen back by another guy, and stolen again from another guy to eventually just round up in the Marine base at Shellstown. All in all, while this adaptation isn't nearly as bad as something like Cowboy Bebop, it still has a lot to be desired. Keep in mind, guys, this episode right here is roughly adapting the first 3 episodes of the anime, and even then you fluffed it, Netflix. I'm giving the first episode of Netflix's One Piece a 3.5 out of 10. But it's no big deal, it's just the first episode. Surely it gets better as the show goes on, right?
You fool!
But let me know what you guys thought of this episode. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Or are you somewhere in between? As always, support your emperor by leaving a like and clicking subscribe. Also, follow me on my social media platforms. You wouldn't want to commit treason now, would you?